Orphan boy inherited only an abandoned barge from his father. But what was inside? Caleb James Sullivan held the yellowed paper between his fingers when the news reached him. At 9 years old, after 3 long years of waiting, he finally received something from the father who had disappeared without explanation. The only inheritance was an old barge full of rusty cars floating in the middle of the Mississippi River. Mrs. Martha, his aunt and only family left, looked at the document with contempt when the notary's office delivered the papers. The boy had inherited that mountain of scrap metal that everyone in the Natchez community knew well. It was a joke among the local fishermen and merchants. "That thing isn't even worth the paper it's written on," murmured the woman, adjusting her flour-stained apron. "Your father was always a dreamer, Caleb James. Now he's left this junk for you to carry." The boy didn't answer. His brown eyes remained fixed on the window of the small brick house, watching the muddy waters of the river that cut through the town. Since he was little, he had always been different from the other children. While they played in the square, he preferred to watch the movements of the boats, trying to understand the secrets the river kept. That afternoon, after Aunt Martha left to sell her baked goods at the market, Caleb James made a decision. He took the old canoe that was tied up behind the house and rowed toward the barge. The sun was strong, and sweat dripped down his forehead as he approached the structure that would soon be his. The barge was larger than it seemed from the shore. Dozens of cars piled on top of each other created a strange landscape in the middle of the calm waters. Some vehicles were old, others newer, but they all had something in common. They had been there a long time, forgotten by the world. Caleb James tied the canoe to one of the wooden beams and climbed onto the vessel. His rubber sandals made a wet noise as he stepped onto the damp deck. The smell of rust mixed with the odor of the river filled his nostrils. It was a place that seemed abandoned by time, but something about it sparked the boy's natural curiosity. Walking among the automobiles, he noticed that some seemed to have been arranged on purpose. They weren't just thrown there any which way. There was a logic to the arrangement, as if someone had thought carefully about where to place each one. This intrigued him even more. That's when he found the first surprise. Between 2 cars in the most remote part of the barge, he discovered a small wooden cabin that wasn't visible from the shore. The structure was half hidden, camouflaged among the larger vehicles. The door was ajar, swaying slightly in the afternoon breeze. Caleb James pushed the door slowly, not knowing what to expect. What he saw left him speechless. The place was clean and organized. There was a small bed with folded sheets, some clothes hanging on an improvised clothesline, and a table with leftover food that didn't look spoiled. Someone had been there recently. Very recently. His heart raced. The boy looked around, trying to process what he was seeing. Who could it be? Why would they be living on that barge everyone considered abandoned? And why had his father left this to him? The questions piled up in his mind as he explored every corner of the cabin. On an improvised shelf, he found well-kept tools organized by size. Screwdrivers, hammers, pliers, all clean and ready for use. Under the bed, he discovered boxes with car parts separated by category. When he heard the sound of a canoe approaching, Caleb James felt panic take over his body. Quickly, he left the cabin and hid behind one of the larger cars. It was his Uncle Arthur, Aunt Martha's brother, rowing hurriedly in his direction. "Caleb James," shouted the man still far away. "Where are you, boy? Your aunt is worried sick." The boy emerged from his hiding spot, trying to look natural. Uncle Arthur was a good man, but he talked too much. If he told about the cabin, soon the whole town would know. And Caleb James Sullivan had a feeling that should remain a secret, at least for now. "I was just looking at the cars, Uncle," he replied, hopping into the man's canoe. "This place isn't safe, son. These planks are all rotten. You could fall in the water and drown," said Arthur, starting to paddle back toward the shore. "Besides, your father never liked anyone messing with these things." That phrase caught Caleb's attention. Uncle Arthur knew more about the ferry than he let on. The boy decided to test him. "You know this ferry well, Uncle?" "Yes, I do. Your father spent a lot of time here, always tinkering with these old cars, organizing parts, fixing things. He said it was a hobby, but I always thought it was strange." "Strange how?" Arthur stopped paddling for a moment and looked at his nephew with a serious expression. Your father was a mysterious man, Caleb. He never properly explained what he did. I just know he helped a lot of people around here, but never wanted to explain how. The rest of the way to the shore was made in silence. Caleb was lost in thought, trying to piece together the puzzle that had begun to form in his mind. The inhabited cabin, the organized tools, the cars arranged with purpose, and now the revelation that his father really did work in that place. When they got home, Aunt Martha was at the door, her face red with nervousness. "Where were you, boy? I told you not to go near that thing," said the woman, grabbing Caleb's arm more tightly than necessary. "He was at the ferry, Martha. Just curious, that's all," explained Arthur, tying up his canoe. "Well, that curiosity ends now," declared his aunt. "Caleb, you are forbidden from going back there, and I don't want to hear any argument about it." The firmness in Aunt Martha's voice was something Caleb had rarely witnessed. The woman had always been affectionate and understanding, even in the most difficult times. Seeing her so upset about the ferry only increased his certainty that there were many more secrets hidden in that place. That night, the boy lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling and planning his next visit to the ferry. His aunt's prohibition didn't matter. He needed to understand what was going on. He needed to find out who had been living in that cabin and why Aunt Martha had gotten so nervous when she learned of his visit. While the house slept, Caleb got up silently and went to the window. The ferry was visible in the distance, a dark silhouette floating on the waters silvered by moonlight. And then he saw something that made his blood run cold. A small light was moving between the cars. Someone was there at that very moment. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. Caleb rubbed his eyes, thinking he might be dreaming. But the light was still there, moving slowly between the stacked vehicles. It was a lantern or lamp, clearly held by someone who knew their way well through that mess of scrap metal. The boy felt a mix of fear and fascination. Who could that person be? Were they dangerous? And why didn't Aunt Martha want him to know about this? The questions pounded in his head as he watched the mysterious light move across the ferry. Suddenly, the light went out. Caleb waited a few minutes, but it didn't reappear. Frustrated and more curious than ever, he went back to bed, but couldn't sleep anymore. He lay there planning how he would get back to the ferry without his aunt noticing. The next morning, Aunt Martha left early to take her baked goods to the downtown market. It was Friday, the busiest day of the week, and she always took a long time to return. Caleb James Sullivan waited for her to disappear from view and ran to get the canoe. This time, he rowed more carefully, trying not to make noise. When he reached the ferry, everything seemed normal. The cars were exactly as he had left them the day before, and there were no visible signs that anyone had been there during the night. But when he entered the cabin, he found a subtle difference. The bed sheets were slightly rumpled as if someone had slept there, and on the table there was a glass with still fresh water and some cookies that definitely weren't there the day before. Caleb felt a shiver run down his spine. Someone really was using that place as a home. But who? And why hide during the day? He decided to explore the ferry further, looking for other clues that might explain the mystery. It was then that he made his second big discovery. At one end of the vessel, hidden between two larger cars, there was a compartment he hadn't noticed before. It was a sort of makeshift hold, covered by a dark tarp that blended with the shadows of the vehicles. With his heart pounding, Caleb slowly lifted the tarp. Inside the compartment, he found something that left him completely bewildered. Dozens of driver's licenses scattered about, all old and belonging to different people. Along with them were stacks of vehicle transfer documents, all dated from previous years. Picking up some of the documents carefully, he began to read the names. To his surprise, he recognized several of them. Mrs. Marlene from the bakery, Mr. Joe from the gas station, the Miller family who lived up the street. They were all people known in the Natchez community. What were those documents doing there? And why were there so many different driver's licenses? Caleb sat on the floor of the compartment, trying to understand what he was seeing. The papers looked official, with stamps and signatures, but they were all yellowed with age. It was then that he heard footsteps approaching on the ferry deck. Quickly, he put some of the documents in his shorts pocket and covered the compartment again with the tarp. He came out of his hiding spot trying to seem natural, but his heart was racing. To his surprise, who appeared between the cars was Mrs. Beatrice, a white-haired lady who lived near the dock and had always been a friend of the family. The woman stopped when she saw him with a startled expression on her wrinkled face. "Caleb, what are you doing here, my boy?" "Hi, Mrs. Beatrice. I'm just getting to know the ferry my father left me," he replied, trying to sound casual. The lady looked around nervously as if searching for something or someone. You haven't seen anything strange around here, have you?" she asked quietly. "Strange how, Mrs. Beatrice?" The woman moved closer to him and whispered, "I've seen lights here for several nights over the last few months. I thought it was just my imagination, but now that you're here..." Caleb decided to trust the lady. Mrs. Beatrice had always been a good person, who looked after the kids on the street and never hurt anyone. "I saw a light last night too, Mrs. Beatrice, and today I found signs that someone slept in the cabin over there." The lady's expression changed completely. She looked around once more as if afraid of being watched. "My boy, you need to be very careful. This ferry, it has stories that not everyone knows." "What kind of stories?" Mrs. Beatrice hesitated, clearly torn between telling or not telling what she knew. "Your father, he wasn't just an ordinary man, Caleb. He helped people who were in trouble. Serious trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "Debts. Mainly debts that people couldn't pay. His father had a way of resolving those situations." Caleb James Sullivan felt a mix of confusion and interest. He showed Mrs. Beatrice some of the documents he had taken from the secret compartment. "Do you know any of these people?" The lady took the papers with trembling hands, and her eyes widened. "Of course I know them. They all had problems with..." She stopped abruptly, looking around again. "With what, Mrs. Beatrice?" "Listen well, my boy. You need to take these papers home and hide them very well, and never ever tell anyone you found them here." "Why? What do they mean?" "They mean your father was trying to help these families when he had to leave." The way she said, "had to leave," caught Caleb James's attention. It wasn't left or disappeared. It was had to leave, as if he hadn't had a choice. "Mrs. Beatrice, did my father leave because he wanted to, or because someone forced him?" The lady took a deep breath before answering. "Your father was a man too brave for his own good, Caleb James. He saw injustices and couldn't stand idle. That ended up creating problems for him." "What kind of problems?" "The kind of problem that makes a man have to leave his family to protect it." That revelation hit Caleb James like a punch in the stomach. For 3 years he had believed his father had abandoned him. Aunt Martha always said he was an irresponsible man who couldn't take care of the family. But now he was beginning to understand that maybe the truth was very different. "Why did Aunt Martha never tell me this?" "Your aunt wants to protect you, my boy. She's afraid you'll follow the same path as your father." Mrs. Beatrice looked at the sky and noticed the sun was already high. "I need to go. But Caleb James, please be very careful. And if you find anything else here, don't tell anyone but me." "Why would you help me?" "Because I owed your father a favor, and now I can repay it by helping you." The lady walked away quickly, leaving Caleb James alone on the ferry with 1,000 questions in his head. He put away the remaining documents and decided to explore the secret compartment further. He needed to better understand what his father was doing in that place. Returning to the hiding spot, he found more interesting things. There was an old notebook with yellowed pages and handwriting he recognized immediately. It was his father's writing. The boy's heart raced as he began to leaf through the pages. The notes were organized by date, and most were written in a sort of code. But some parts were clear enough to understand. There were people's names, amounts of money, and words like returned, recovered, and resolved. One specific entry caught his attention. March 15th, the Millers, car recovered after negotiation, $650 returned, situation normalized. Caleb James remembered the Miller family who lived up the street. They had lost their car a few years back, and he remembered seeing Mrs. Mary Miller crying on her doorstep for several weeks. But after a while, mysteriously, they got another vehicle. He kept reading the notes, and found more similar cases. His father seemed to be documenting operations where he helped families recover things they had lost, mainly cars, and from the amounts noted, he also returned money to them. But where did that money come from? And how did his father manage to recover the vehicles? It was when he found an entry that changed everything. August 2nd, warning. Sterling is getting suspicious. I need to be more discreet in the next operations. If anything happens to me, may Caleb James discover the truth when he grows up. Caleb James read the phrase several times, trying to process what he was seeing. His father had predicted that something might happen to him, and he had left those clues specifically for his son to find. But who was Sterling? And why did he pose a danger to his father? Continuing to read, he found more references to that name. Sterling was always associated with words like predatory collection, illegal interest, and threats. It was starting to become clear that his father was dealing with a dangerous person. The last entry in the notebook was dated just a few days before his father's disappearance. September 10th, unsustainable situation. Sterling found out about the refunds. I need to protect Martha and Caleb James. I'm going to step away for a while until I find a permanent solution. If anything happens to me, everything they need to know is on the ferry. Caleb James felt tears burning his eyes. His father hadn't abandoned them. He was trying to protect them, and more importantly, he was alive, or at least he was when he wrote that last entry. He put the notebook away with the documents and decided to go back home. He needed to process everything he had discovered and decide what his next step would be. But one thing was clear. He couldn't tell Aunt Martha anything, at least not yet. When he got home, he found his aunt in the kitchen, preparing lunch. She looked at him with a serious expression. "Where were you, Caleb James?" "I went for a walk by the docks," he lied, trying to sound natural. "You weren't on that ferry again, were you?" "No, Aunt. I just went to see the fishermen's boats." Aunt Martha watched him for a few seconds, as if trying to figure out if he was lying. Then she sighed and went back to stirring the pot. "Caleb James, I know you're curious about your father, but some things are better left in the past." "Why, Aunt?" "Because the past sometimes hurts more than it helps." The boy wanted to ask more, but he realized Aunt Martha wasn't willing to talk about the subject. He went up to his room and hid the documents and the notebook under the mattress. He needed a plan to find out more about this Sterling and fully understand what his father was doing. That afternoon, he decided to go to the gas station where Mr. Walter worked, whose name had appeared in the documents. If his father had really helped that man, maybe he could provide more information. The station was at the entrance to town, and Mr. Walter was known to be a discreet and trustworthy person. When Caleb James arrived, the man was organizing some car parts in the back of the shop. "Hi, Mr. Walter," the boy greeted. "Hi, Caleb James, how are you, son?" replied the man, wiping his hands on a rag stained with grease. "I'm fine. Can I ask you a question?" "Of course, go ahead." Caleb James hesitated for a moment, trying to find the best way to approach the subject. "Did you know my father well?" Mr. Walter's expression changed immediately. He looked around, checking if anyone was listening to the conversation. "Why are you asking that, son?" "It's just that I inherited his ferry, and people say he helped folks around here. I wanted to better understand what he did." Mr. Walter put the tools on the workbench and moved closer to Caleb James. "Your father was a good man, Caleb James, a very good man. He helped me when I needed it most." "How so?" The man looked around again before continuing. "A few years back, I lost my car to a man who lent money here in the area. I couldn't pay the interest he was charging, and he took the vehicle. And my father helped you get it back?" "He did, but I don't know how. One day I was desperate, thinking about how I was going to work without the car, and your father showed up here, said he could solve my problem." "And did he?" "He did. A week later, my car appeared at my doorstep in the early hours, along with an envelope containing enough money to settle my debt." Caleb James Sullivan felt a strange emotion upon hearing that. Pride mixed with curiosity and a bit of fear. "Do you know who that man was who lent money?" Mr. Walter became visibly nervous at the question. "Caleb, this is a dangerous matter. Your father got into trouble because of it." But I need to know. It's about my father. The man took a deep breath before speaking. His name is Victor Sterling. He has a business here in the region. Very high-interest loans. When people can't pay, he takes everything they have. And my father was standing up to him. Not exactly standing up. Your father found a way to, let's say, return to the families what they had unfairly lost. How? That I don't know, Caleb, and I don't want to know. What your father did was risky, and in the end he had to leave because of it. Mr. Walter stepped back a little, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. My advice is that you forget this matter. Sterling is still around, and he's not the type of person who forgives those who interfere with his business. But what if my father needs help? Caleb, your father knew what he was doing when he left. He did it to protect you and your aunt. Don't ruin his sacrifice by getting involved in this. The boy left the gas station with more questions than answers. Now he knew who Sterling was and had a better idea of what his father was facing. But he also began to understand the magnitude of the danger behind it all. When he returned home, he found Aunt Martha talking quietly with Uncle Arthur on the porch. They stopped talking as soon as they saw him arrive, which only increased his suspicion that they knew more than they were saying. "What were you talking about?" he asked directly. Aunt Martha and Uncle Arthur exchanged a nervous glance. "Adult matters, Caleb," his aunt replied. "Nothing you need to worry about." "Does it have to do with my father?" "Caleb," Uncle Arthur began. "It does, doesn't it?" the boy insisted. Aunt Martha sighed deeply. "Arthur told me you went to the ferry yesterday, and I heard that today you went to talk to Mr. Walter." Caleb felt his blood run cold. How did she know about his conversation with the gas station owner? How did you know? This is a small town, my boy. News travels fast, and I'm afraid of what you might be uncovering. Why did you never tell me the truth about my father? Because the truth is dangerous, Caleb. Your father got involved with people who don't forgive, and I don't want the same thing to happen to you. But is he alive? Aunt Martha hesitated before answering. I don't know, my boy. I truly don't know. But do you think he could be? I hope so. Every day I hope so. That conversation confirmed several of Caleb's suspicions. Aunt Martha knew much more than she had told him so far, and her reluctance to talk about the subject wasn't just overprotectiveness, but real fear. That night, the boy went back to watching the ferry from his window, and again he saw a light moving among the cars. This time he decided he would find out who that person was, even if it meant openly disobeying his aunt. He waited until he was sure Aunt Martha was asleep and slipped out of the house silently. The night was clear, with an almost full moon that lit up the river. He took the canoe and paddled slowly, trying not to make a sound. As he approached the ferry, he saw that the light had gone out again, but this time he was prepared. He tied up the canoe and climbed onto the vessel carefully, trying to locate any sign of movement. That's when he heard a voice behind him. "Who's there?" Caleb James Sullivan turned quickly and saw a silhouette emerging from among the cars. It was an older man, with a graying beard and simple clothes. He held a small lantern, but did not point it at the boy's face. I'm Caleb James Sullivan," the boy stammered, his heart racing. "Caleb James Sullivan," repeated the man, and his voice changed tone completely. "Are you Samuel Sullivan's son?" "I am," he replied, surprised that the stranger knew his father's name. The man moved closer, and Caleb James could see his face in the moonlight. It was someone he didn't know, but who seemed familiar somehow. "My name is Silas. I work for your father." "Work? But my father disappeared 3 years ago." "He didn't disappear, son. He's in hiding, and he asked me to look after things here until he could come back." Caleb James felt as if the world had stopped spinning. "My father is alive." "He is, and he knows you inherited the ferry. In fact, he was hoping you'd come here looking for answers." "Where is he?" "In a safe place, but I can't say where. It's still dangerous." "Because of Sterling?" Silas was surprised by the boy's knowledge. "You already know about him." "Found out today. And I found my father's notebook." "Then you already understand why he had to leave?" Caleb James nodded, though he still had 1,000 questions. "Silas, what were you doing here?" Your father discovered that Sterling was charging abusive interest to poor families in the area. Interest that wasn't legal. He was documenting everything, and at the same time trying to help people recover what they'd lost. How did you manage to recover the cars? Sterling kept the vehicles he took from people in a storage yard outside of town. Your father found out where it was and, let's say he found a way to return them to the families. You stole them back? It wasn't stealing, Caleb James. It was justice. Those cars were taken illegally through fraudulent contracts. Your father was just righting a wrong. The explanation made sense to the boy, but he still didn't understand everything. And why did he have to run away? Because Sterling found out what was happening. He started making threats, not only against your father, but against you and your aunt too. Samuel decided the only way to protect the family was to step away. But when is he coming back? Silas hesitated before answering. That depends on a few things that still need to be settled. What kind of things? Caleb James, your father left a mission for me. I need to finish the work the two of you started. Gather enough evidence to end Sterling's business for good. And can I help? You're too young for that, son. But I want to help. I want my father to come home. Silas looked at the boy for a long moment, clearly conflicted about what to do. All right. But it has to be my way, following my instructions exactly as I say. And your aunt can't know anything. Why? Because if she knew your father was alive, she'd be desperate to find him, and that would put everyone in danger. Caleb James agreed, though he knew hiding this from Aunt Martha would be one of the hardest things he'd ever done. What do I need to do? For now, keep coming here during the day, as if you're just exploring your inheritance. I'll teach you little by little about the work your father was doing, and together we'll finish what he started. And then your father can come home. That promise was all Caleb James needed to hear. No matter how difficult or dangerous it was, he was determined to do whatever it took to bring his father back. Silas walked him to the canoe and helped him off the ferry. Tomorrow, come here in the afternoon. I'll show you some things that will help you understand all this better. All right. And Caleb, be very careful. Sterling has eyes and ears all over town. If he finds out you're getting involved in this, he might try to use you to get to your father. The way back home was made in silence, with Caleb lost in thought. He finally had answers to the questions that had been tormenting him for 3 years. His father was alive, and there was a real chance to bring him back. But he was also beginning to understand the magnitude of the challenge they had ahead. Sterling was clearly a powerful and dangerous man, and putting an end to his business wouldn't be a simple task for a grown man, let alone for a 9-year-old boy. Even so, for the first time in a long while, Caleb felt hopeful. He had a mission, he had an ally, and he was certain he was fighting for something worthwhile, bringing his family back. The next morning he woke up earlier than usual and helped Aunt Martha with the household chores without her having to ask. The woman found his behavior odd, but said nothing. Caleb was trying to make up in advance for the lies he would have to tell in the coming days. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. When Aunt Martha left for work, Caleb waited a bit and then went straight to the ferry. Silas was already there organizing some materials in the secret cabin. In the daylight, the man looked older than he had seemed the night before. He must have been about 50, with graying hair and a face marked by sun and work. "Good morning, Caleb," he greeted when he saw the boy arrive. "Good morning, Mr. Silas. Today, I'm going to explain to you better how your father's work used to function. Come here." Silas led him to the compartment where Caleb had found the documents, but now with a proper explanation, he could better understand what he was seeing. "Each one of these papers represents a family that was harmed by Sterling," explained Silas, showing the stacks of documents. "Your father documented each case, kept the evidence of the fraud, and then worked to return what had been taken unjustly. How did you know where Sterling kept the cars?" "Your father spent months investigating. He found out Sterling has a large warehouse on a farm about 20 kilometers from town. That's where he keeps everything he takes from people." "And you would go in there and get the cars back?" "It wasn't exactly like that. First, we would check if the car had really been taken illegally. Then your father would try to negotiate with Sterling, offering to settle the family's debts for a fair amount without the abusive interest. And if he didn't accept, then we used other methods. Silas showed Caleb a part of the ferry he hadn't explored yet. It was a covered area where several cars were arranged differently from the others. These seemed to be in better condition, as if they had been cared for recently. These here are cars that still need to be returned to their families. Your father managed to recover them just before he had to leave, but didn't have time to make the returns. Caleb counted about 15 vehicles in that section. It was an impressive number. And now the two of us are going to finish the job. We're going to return these cars and resolve the situations of the remaining families. But how are we going to do that without Sterling noticing? Your father drew up a plan before he left, a plan that will put an end to Sterling's business once and for all. Silas took a thick envelope from inside the cabin. Everything is here. Documents that prove the frauds, records of the illegal interest, even recordings of conversations where Sterling admits what he does. Recordings? Your father was very clever. He would record the conversations when he went to try to negotiate with Sterling. The man is arrogant and would always confess his illegal practices, thinking he was safe. Caleb James Sullivan took the envelope and began to leaf through the contents. There were hundreds of pages of documents, photographs, and even some CDs with the recordings. It was impressive material. With all this, why didn't you report him before? Because Sterling has powerful friends in the region, politicians, local authorities. Your father knew that if he tried a simple report, it would be covered up and he would be even more exposed. So what's the plan? The plan is to use the media. Your father managed to get in touch with a journalist from New Orleans who is interested in doing a story about the situation. With all this documentation and the testimonies from the families, it would be impossible to cover up the case. The strategy made sense to Caleb. He had seen on television cases where journalists managed to expose irregularities that local authorities tried to hide. And when are we going to put the plan into action? There are still a few things missing. We need to get the testimonies from the families, organize the evidence better, and most importantly, ensure we have sufficient protection for when the story airs. Protection? Caleb, when this story is revealed, Sterling will try to take revenge on everyone who was involved. Your father has already arranged some security measures, but it's still not enough. The boy began to understand the complexity of the situation. It wasn't simply a matter of gathering evidence and handing it over to the authorities. It was a careful operation involving aspects of security, politics, and media strategy. What can I do to help? For now, you can help me organize the documents and get to know the families involved better. Many of them don't even know their cars have already been recovered. Can we start by returning the cars? Not yet. If we start returning them now, Sterling will realize someone is messing with his business again. We need to return everything at once, along with the media exposure. Mr. Silas showed Caleb a list with the names of the families whose cars were on the barge waiting to be returned. The boy recognized almost all the names. The Andrade family. I know them. Mrs. Gladys always cries when she talks about losing her husband's car that they had just paid off. And she doesn't know the car is here safe, waiting to be returned to her. Caleb felt a strong emotion imagining Mrs. Gladys's joy when she discovered she would recover her late husband's vehicle. Mr. Silas, how much longer until we put the plan into action? If all goes well, a few weeks, maybe a month, and then my father can come back? He can. In fact, he plans to return exactly the day the story airs. It will be a way to ensure Sterling can't do anything against him. The prospect of reuniting with his father in such a short time filled Caleb with energy and determination. A month seemed like a long time, but it was also something concrete, a real goal. What do I need to do today? Today I'm going to teach you how to organize the documents the way your father did. It's meticulous work, but very important. Mr. Silas spent the rest of the morning teaching Caleb the organizational system his father had developed. Each family had a specific folder with all the relevant information: copies of the fraudulent contracts, photographs of the cars, ownership documents, and even personal information about their current financial situation. The work was fascinating for the boy. Each folder told a different human story, but all with a common element: hard-working families who had been exploited by someone taking advantage of their desperation. "Your father always said that each of these cars represents much more than just a vehicle," explained Mr. Silas. "For these families, it represents dignity, independence, the ability to work and support their children. And Sterling doesn't care about that. Sterling only cares about profit. To him, these people are just a source of income." During lunch, which they had in the ferry's own cabin, Silas told more stories about his father's work. Caleb James Sullivan was impressed by the dedication and courage the man had shown. "Your father spent sleepless nights planning how to help a specific family. He treated each case as if it were his own family being harmed. Is that why he was never home?" "Exactly. And your aunt didn't understand why he was always busy with other people. She thought he didn't care about you. But he did care. Very much. Every time we talked, he spoke about you. About how he wanted you to grow up in a fairer world, where people like Sterling couldn't exploit the weak." That revelation deeply moved Caleb James Sullivan. For 3 years, he had carried the pain of thinking he wasn't important to his father. Discovering it was exactly the opposite changed everything in his perspective. In the afternoon, Silas taught him about another crucial part of the work: how to document new cases of fraud. Sterling is still operating, even after your father passed, so new families always appear who need help. How do we find out about these cases? Mainly through Mrs. Beatrice. She's our informant in town. When someone comes to her with problems related to Sterling, she writes everything down and passes the information to me. Caleb James Sullivan remembered his conversation with the lady the day before. That's why she was nervous when she saw me here yesterday. Exactly. She didn't know if you had found out about my work here. And now does she know I'm helping you? Not yet. I'll speak with her tonight. It's important she knows she can trust you. In the late afternoon, as he prepared to go back home, Caleb James Sullivan asked a question that had been bothering him since morning. "Mr. Silas, how did you meet my father?" "I was also a victim of Sterling, Caleb James Sullivan. 5 years ago, he took my small business because of a debt I couldn't pay. Your father helped me recover everything and even got money for me to restart the business." "And that's why you decided to help him?" "Not just for that. I saw your father was doing something important, something that could change many people's lives. I wanted to be part of it." "Aren't you afraid?" "I am. But I'm more afraid of living in a world where men like Sterling can do whatever they want without consequences." That answer touched Caleb James Sullivan deeply. He understood he wasn't just fighting to bring his father back, but was part of something bigger, something that could really make a difference in many people's lives. When he got home, he found Aunt Martha more nervous than usual. She was pacing back and forth in the kitchen, clearly worried about something. "What happened, Aunt?" "Caleb James Sullivan. Someone was asking about you at the market today." The boy's blood ran cold. "Asking what?" "A well-dressed man. He wanted to know about your family, about the ferry you inherited. He asked if you'd been poking around there." "What did you tell him?" "I said you were just a curious kid who didn't know anything about anything." But he didn't seem to believe it. Caleb James Sullivan tried to stay calm, but inside he was terrified. From what Silas had told him, Sterling had eyes and ears all over town, and now it seemed those eyes were turning toward him. What did this man look like? Tall, dark hair, expensive clothes. He had a way about him, intimidating. "Do you think he'll come back?" "I don't know, my boy, but I'm afraid, very afraid." Aunt Martha sat in the kitchen chair, and Caleb James Sullivan noticed she was trembling. "Aunt, are you all right?" "No, Caleb, I'm not well. That man reminded me of things that happened before your father left." "What kind of things?" "Threats. Strange people moving around town, asking questions about our family." Caleb sat beside his aunt and took her hand. "Aunt, I promise I'll be careful. You have to promise me something more important, my boy." "What?" "If that man comes back, if anyone comes here asking questions or making threats, you tell me immediately. And don't try to handle anything alone. I promise." But even as he made the promise, Caleb knew the situation had grown complicated. If Sterling really was investigating his activities, he would need to be much more careful. And most importantly, he needed to tell Silas what had happened. That night, against all the safety recommendations he had received, he decided to go back to the ferry to warn Silas about Sterling's visit to town. He couldn't wait until the next day to pass on that information. When he arrived at the ferry, he found Silas organizing some documents by the light of a small lantern. "Caleb, what are you doing here? It's dangerous to come at night." "I know, but something important happened." Caleb told him about the visit of the well-dressed man to the market and about Aunt Martha's nervousness. Silas listened to everything in silence with an increasingly worried expression. "This means Sterling suspects you're getting involved in the matter." "How could he suspect? I only started helping yesterday." "Because he's clever, and he probably has informants who saw you talking with Mr. Walter and Mrs. Beatrice. What do we do now?" Silas was silent for a few minutes, clearly thinking about the available options. "We have two alternatives. Either you stop coming here and I continue the work alone, or we accelerate our plans and put everything into action more quickly. What do you think is best?" "Honestly, I think we should speed everything up. If Sterling is investigating, it's a sign he's feeling threatened. And if he's feeling threatened, he might try something drastic." "Like what?" "He might try to leave the region, taking all the money he managed to steal from the families. Or worse, he might try to silence the people who could testify against him." The gravity of the situation became clear to Caleb. It wasn't just a matter of time, but of safety for all the people involved. "What do we need to do?" "Tomorrow I'll get in touch with the journalist from New Orleans. Let's see if we can speed up the report. And you'll need to help convince some families to give statements as soon as possible." "Which families?" "The most important ones for the investigation. Those with the clearest cases of fraud and who aren't afraid to speak." Silas took out a list of names and showed it to Caleb. "These 5 families are crucial. If we get their statements, we'll have enough evidence for the report." Caleb looked at the names on the list. He knew them all, but some were more reserved people who would hardly agree to expose themselves publicly. "I think I can manage to speak with the Miller family and with Mrs. Gladys. But the others?" "I'll take care of the others. You focus on those 2 as they trust you the most because of your family's friendship." "When should I look for them?" "As soon as possible, but very carefully. If Sterling is indeed suspicious, he might be watching these families too." Caleb agreed, although the responsibility made him nervous. He had never done anything so important and dangerous in his life. "Mr. Silas, are you sure we can do this?" "I'm sure we're going to try. And we're going to give our best to honor the work your father started. And will he really be able to come back when all this is over?" "He will, Caleb James. Your father is eagerly waiting for that day." The way back home was tense. Caleb James kept looking around, searching for signs that he was being followed. The feeling of danger was real now, no longer a distant possibility. When he entered the house, Aunt Martha was still awake, sitting in the living room with a rosary in her hands. "Where were you, Caleb James?" "I went for a walk. I couldn't sleep." "Please, my boy, don't leave the house at night until this situation is resolved." "What situation, Aunt?" "The situation with that man who showed up today. I have a bad feeling about it." Caleb James felt the urge to tell his aunt everything at that moment, about Silas, about his father being alive, about the plan to take down Sterling. But he remembered Silas's words about the danger of involving more people. "All right, Aunt, I'll stay home at night. And during the day, it's also better if you don't wander around town alone." "Aunt, I need to live my normal life. If I start hiding, it will look like I have something to hide." Caleb James's logic was perfect, and Aunt Martha knew it. But her maternal instinct made her worried. "At least promise me you'll be careful about who you talk to and where you go." "I promise." That night, Caleb James slept little and poorly. His mind was full of plans, worries, and the excitement of knowing he might soon see his father again. But there was also the real fear that something could go wrong, and everyone could end up in danger. The next morning, he woke up determined to do his part in the plan. He waited for Aunt Martha to leave for work and went straight to look for the Miller family. They lived in a small house at the end of Main Street, and Caleb James knew the couple was always home during the mornings. When he knocked on the door, he was greeted by Mrs. Mary Miller, a middle-aged woman who had always been kind to him. "Hi, Caleb James. How are you, son?" "Good morning, Mrs. Mary. I'm fine. Can I talk to you and Mr. Joe about something important?" "Of course, come in." The house was simple but tidy, with old but well-kept furniture. Mr. Joe Miller was in the living room reading an old newspaper. "Good morning, Mr. Joe." "Good morning, Caleb James. Have a seat, son." Caleb James sat on the sofa, trying to find the best way to approach the subject. "I wanted to talk to you about the car you lost a few years ago." The couple's expression changed immediately. Mrs. Mary looked down, visibly emotional, while Mr. Joe became tense. "Why do you want to know about that, Caleb James?" "Because I found out my father was trying to help families who went through the same situation as you." "Your father?" "Yes. And now I want to finish the work he started." Mr. Joe leaned forward, interested. "Finish the work? How?" Caleb James took a deep breath before continuing. "Do you still have the documents for the car and the loan you took out?" "We do. Why?" "Because with those documents, we can prove you were cheated, and maybe even get the car back." Mrs. Mary quickly raised her head. "Get it back? How?" "I can't explain all the details right now, but there's a real chance you could recover what you lost." The couple exchanged a hopeful but cautious look. "Caleb James, this sounds too good to be true, sir," said Mr. Joe. "I understand why you'd think that. But do you trust me?" "We do. Your family has always been good to us." "Then let me see the documents. And if I can prove you were cheated, would you agree to give a statement about what happened?" "A statement to whom?" "To a journalist who is investigating cases like yours." Mrs. Mary stood up, excited. "Joe, go get the papers. If there's a chance for us to recover my father's car..." The car had belonged to Mrs. Mary's father, who had passed away a few years earlier. It was a family inheritance that had been lost because of Sterling's predatory interest rates. Caleb James understood why that case was so emotionally important to the family. When Mr. Walter returned with the documents, Caleb James analyzed them carefully. Even at 9 years old, he could see some obvious irregularities in the contract. "Look here," he said, pointing to a clause. "The interest you were paying was much higher than what's allowed by law." "We suspected that, but we didn't understand the law," admitted Mr. Walter. "And here, look at this part about the guarantees. The contract says the car would only be taken after 3 months without payment, but you lost it after just 1 week." "That's true. We were only late a week, and they already came to take it." Caleb James borrowed the documents, promising to return them soon. "I'm going to show this to someone who understands the law. If they confirm it was fraud, would you agree to give a statement?" "We agree," replied Mrs. Mary without hesitation. "If there's a chance to get justice, we want to be part of it." "And you're not afraid of retaliation?" "We have nothing left to lose, Caleb James. If we can help other families not go through what we went through, it's already worth it." The couple's determination impressed Caleb James. He understood why his father had chosen to help people like them. They were decent people who deserved justice. Leaving the Miller's house, he went straight to Mrs. Gladys's house. She lived alone in a small house near the church, and Caleb James knew she was always home during the mornings, sewing to supplement her income. When Mrs. Gladys opened the door, Caleb James saw that her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. "Hello, Mrs. Gladys. Are you okay?" "Hello, dear. Yes, I am. Just a little sad today. Please come in." Mrs. Gladys's house was even smaller than the Millers', but impeccably tidy. There were photographs of her late husband everywhere, including a large photo of him next to the car he had lost. "Mrs. Gladys, I came to talk about Mr. George's car." She stopped sewing and looked at Caleb James with surprise. "My George's car? Why?" "Because I found out that maybe you didn't lose it fairly." "What do you mean, dear?" Caleb James explained about the investigation being done and the possibility of proving that Sterling's contracts were fraudulent. "Do you still have the car and loan documents?" "I have everything saved. I could never bring myself to get rid of those papers, even though they remind me of sad things." "Can I take a look?" Mrs. Gladys went to get a shoebox where she kept all her important documents. When she opened it, Caleb James saw she had even kept the receipts for the payments she made before losing the car. Analyzing the papers, he found even more glaring irregularities than in the Miller's case. The interest was absurdly high, and there were several clauses that clearly violated consumer protection laws. "Mrs. Gladys, you were robbed," said Caleb James, with genuine anger in his voice. "I always suspected that. But what could a widowed woman do against a powerful man like Sterling? You can join other families and fight for justice. Alone, I don't have the courage. But if other people were also harmed, they were. Many others." Caleb James told Mrs. Gladys about the Miller family and how they had agreed to give a statement. "If you also agree to participate, together with other families, you might not only get justice but perhaps even recover what you lost." "Recover how?" "I can't explain that right now, but I can assure you that possibility exists." Mrs. Gladys fell silent for a few minutes, looking at her husband's photograph. "What would my George do in a situation like this? From what I used to hear people say about him, I think he would fight for what's right." "That's true. He was always a fighter." The woman stood up and took Caleb James Sullivan's hand. "I accept, my son. If there's a chance to get justice for my George and help other families, I want to be part of it. Aren't you afraid? At my age, my son, what you're afraid of is dying without having done the right thing." Mrs. Gladys's courage moved Caleb James Sullivan deeply. That woman who had lost everything and had nothing to gain was willing to fight just for justice. "I'll need to keep the documents for a few days." "Keep them as long as you need, and anything you need from me, just say the word." "Would you like to speak in person with the other families who are participating?" "I'd like that very much. We could meet and talk about all of this." Caleb James Sullivan left Mrs. Gladys's house with the 2 sets of documents and a feeling of mission accomplished. He had secured the support of the 2 most important families for the investigation, and both were willing to go public to get justice. But as he was walking back home, he noticed a black car parked on the street corner. The same car passed him slowly twice, and Caleb James Sullivan was sure he was being followed. Feeling real danger for the first time, he quickly ducked into a nearby store and watched through the window. The car stopped in front of the store, and Caleb James Sullivan could see there were 2 men inside. One of them picked up a phone and made a short call. After a few minutes that felt like an eternity, the car drove away. But Caleb James Sullivan understood the situation had become much more serious. Sterling wasn't just suspicious, he was actively investigating and possibly tracking his movements. When he finally got home, he decided he needed to tell Silas immediately about the success with the families and about being followed. But how to get to the ferry without being detected? That's when he had an idea. Uncle Arthur always went fishing on Thursday afternoons, and he always passed near the ferry. He could ask to go along and use the fishing trip as a pretext to meet Silas. When Uncle Arthur came home for lunch, Caleb James Sullivan made the invitation. "Uncle, can I go fishing with you this afternoon?" "Of course you can, my boy. It's been a long time since you showed any interest in fishing. I just need to clear my head. I've been very worried about some things." "Worried about what?" "About the future, about what I'm going to do with my life." The answer was partially true, and Uncle Arthur was pleased to hear his nephew was thinking about the future. "Fishing is good therapy for organizing your thoughts. We'll head out around 3. At 3 in the afternoon, Caleb James Sullivan was in Uncle Arthur's canoe, rowing toward the best fishing spot in the area, which was near the car ferry. When they arrived, Uncle Arthur focused on preparing the bait, and Caleb James Sullivan took the opportunity to observe the ferry. He didn't see any signs of Silas, but he knew he would be there. He needed to find a way to communicate with him without raising Uncle Arthur's suspicions. "Uncle, I need to go over to the ferry real quick." "What for?" "I forgot to check if the ropes tying it down are okay. Since it's mine now, I need to take care of it." Uncle Arthur looked at the ferry and then at his nephew. "All right, but be quick, and be careful with those rotten planks." Caleb James Sullivan rowed to the ferry and climbed aboard quickly. He found Silas hidden in the cabin, organizing the documents they had sorted the day before. "Caleb James, I'm glad you came. How did the conversations with the families go?" "Very well. Both the Millers and Mrs. Gladys agreed to give their statements, and I brought their documents." Silas quickly examined the papers and smiled. "Perfect. With these documents, we have enough evidence to prove the fraud. But there was a bad thing too. I think I'm being followed." Caleb James Sullivan told him about the black car and the men who had been watching him that morning. "That is very concerning," said Silas, visibly apprehensive. "If Sterling sent someone to follow you, it's because he's taking you seriously as a threat. What do we do? From now on, you don't come here during the day anymore, and at night only in an emergency. But how will I help with the plan? You've already done the most important part, getting the family's support. Now I'll take care of the rest." "And when will the report be?" "I managed to speak with the journalist this morning. He can come here next weekend to do the interviews." "Just 1 week?" "Just 1 week, and your father already knows. He'll be here on the day of the report." The news that he would see his father in just 1 week left Caleb James Sullivan both euphoric and nervous. There was little time left, and many things could still go wrong. "Mr. Silas, I think we should tell my aunt about all this." "Why?" "Because she's very nervous about the presence of strange men in town. And if she knew the truth, maybe she could help us." Silas thought for a moment. "Perhaps you're right. Martha has always been a courageous woman, and she knows the townspeople well." "So can I tell her?" "You can. But let me talk to her first to explain the safety details." "When?" "Tonight. Tell her that a friend of your father's wants to talk to her about an important matter." "Will she accept?" "If you say it's about your father, she will accept." Caleb James Sullivan returned to Uncle Arthur's canoe with a definite plan for the next few hours. He would finally tell the truth to Aunt Martha, and in 1 week he would be reuniting with his father. The rest of the fishing afternoon passed slowly, with Caleb James Sullivan anxious to get home and talk to his aunt. Uncle Arthur noticed his restlessness, but attributed it to the natural anxiety of a 9-year-old boy. When they got home, Aunt Martha was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Caleb James Sullivan waited for Uncle Arthur to move away and approached her. "Aunt, I need to talk to you about something important." "What is it, my boy?" "Tonight, a friend of my father's wants to talk to you." Aunt Martha dropped the spoon she was holding and quickly turned to Caleb James Sullivan. "A friend of your father?" "Yes, he has important information about what happened 3 years ago." "What kind of information?" "About why my father had to leave, and about the possibility of him coming back." Aunt Martha sat down in a chair, visibly shaken by the news. "Caleb, where did you find this man?" "At the ferry. He was taking care of my father's things." "And you trust him?" "I do, and I think you will trust him too when you talk to him." "Where will this conversation be?" "He prefers it to be at the ferry. It's safer." Aunt Martha was silent for a few minutes, clearly torn between the hope of knowing the truth about her brother-in-law and the fear of what she might discover. "All right, what time?" "After dark, when Uncle Arthur is asleep." "And if it's dangerous?" "It won't be, Aunt. I trust this man with my life." That night would be decisive for the entire family's future, and Caleb James Sullivan felt they were finally close to solving a mystery that had lasted 3 years. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like, and especially to subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out now. Continuing. During dinner, Aunt Martha was visibly nervous. He ate little and spoke even less, lost in thoughts about the conversation he would have in a few hours. Caleb James Sullivan tried to maintain a normal appearance, talking with Uncle Arthur about the afternoon fishing. "Did you catch anything good?" asked his aunt, trying to disguise her anxiety. "A few small mullets," replied Uncle Arthur. Caleb was a bit distracted today. He seemed to be thinking of other things. "It's normal at his age," said Aunt Martha, looking meaningfully at her nephew. After dinner, Uncle Arthur went to the living room to watch television, as he did every night. Caleb and Aunt Martha stayed in the kitchen, ostensibly tidying the dishes, but in reality waiting for the moment to leave. "Caleb, before we talk to this man, I need you to tell me everything you already know." whispered Aunt Martha. "All right, but it's a lot, Aunt." Caleb briefly recounted his discovery of the inhabited cabin, the documents he found, his knowledge about Sterling, and finally about Silas and his revelation that his father was alive. Aunt Martha listened to everything in silence with tears in her eyes. "So Samuel is really alive?" "He is, and he wants to come home." "Why did he never contact us in these 3 years?" "Silas says it was to protect us. Any contact could have put everyone in danger. And isn't it dangerous now?" "It still is, but they have a plan to end the danger for good." When Uncle Arthur went to sleep, around 10 at night, Caleb and Aunt Martha quietly left the house. The night was clear, but they used a small flashlight to light the path to the riverbank. "How long has it been since you came here at night, Aunt?" "Many years, my boy, since before your father disappeared." When they reached the ferry, Silas was waiting for them on the deck, illuminated only by the full moon. Aunt Martha hesitated for a moment before boarding the vessel. "Mrs. Martha, a pleasure. My name is Silas Ferreira," said the man, extending his hand. "A pleasure, Mr. Silas. Caleb told me you have news about Samuel." "I do, and it's good news." Silas led them to the cabin, where he had prepared some chairs and hot coffee. The atmosphere was cozy, despite the unusual circumstances. "Mrs. Martha, your brother-in-law is well and very much wants to come home," began Silas. "Where is he?" "In a safe place, a few hours from here. He had to distance himself because he discovered that Sterling planned to harm your family." Aunt Martha began to cry. 3 years, Mr. Silas. 3 years I thought he had abandoned us." "He never abandoned you. Every day he asks about you and about Caleb. Every day he plans his return." "And why only now can he return?" Silas explained in detail the plan to use the media to expose Sterling, the work of documenting frauds, and the strategy to protect all the families involved. With public exposure, Sterling won't be able to retaliate without exposing himself even more. And the state authorities will have to act, since the local ones may be compromised. And do you think it will work? We have very solid evidence, Mrs. Martha, and now, with Caleb securing the support of more families, we have enough testimonies for a devastating report. Aunt Martha looked at Caleb with a mixture of pride and worry. "My boy got involved in something very dangerous." "He got involved because he inherited his father's courage," said Silas. "And he was crucial to the plan's success." "And when will Samuel return?" "Next Saturday, when the report airs. It will be the safest moment, because Sterling will be dealing with a public crisis and won't have the time or resources to pursue anyone." "Just 5 more days?" "Just 5 more days." Aunt Martha fell silent for a few minutes, processing everything she had heard. "Mr. Silas, what can I do to help?" "You can help Caleb James Sullivan stay safe in the coming days, and if possible you can try to discreetly talk to the other families involved, to prepare them for the interviews." "Which families?" Silas showed her the list of names, and Aunt Martha recognized all of them. "These people trust me, I can talk to them. But very carefully. We don't know if Sterling has informants among the neighbors. I know how to be discreet." "And there's one more important thing," said Silas. "We need to prepare a safe place for Samuel to stay when he returns. Your house might be watched. He can stay at my sister's house in Memphis. It's far enough to be safe, but close enough for us to visit." "Perfect. I'll pass this information to him." The conversation went on for another hour, with Silas explaining every detail of the plan and answering Aunt Martha's questions. When they finally said goodbye, the woman was visibly calmer and more determined. "Mr. Silas, thank you for looking after my brother-in-law all these years, and thank you for looking after my Caleb James now. Samuel is like a brother to me, Mrs. Martha, and Caleb James is a special boy. You have a good family. And soon we'll be together again." On the way back home, Aunt Martha was different. The anxiety had been replaced by a new energy, a sense of purpose. "Caleb James, I'm proud of you." "Why, Aunt?" "For having the courage to discover the truth, for fighting to bring your father back." "You're not mad because I lied." "I'm not mad. You did what you needed to do, and now we're going to work together to finish this. Do you think everything will work out?" "I think so, my boy. For the first time in 3 years, I think so." That night, they both slept better than they had in a long time. They had a clear mission, a set deadline, and the certainty that they would soon be reunited with Samuel. The next morning, Friday, Aunt Martha woke up with renewed energy. She prepared a special breakfast and talked animatedly with Uncle Arthur about the plans for the weekend. "Arthur, I think I'll visit my sister in Memphis on Saturday. It's been a while since I've seen her." "That's a good idea. You've been very tense lately. A little break will do you good." "I'll take Caleb James with me. He also needs to get out of this town for a bit." "Great idea. The boy has been very thoughtful." After Uncle Arthur left for work, Aunt Martha turned to Caleb James. "Today I'll start talking to the families on the list. Do you want to come with me?" "I do. I can help explain things." "Then let's start with Mrs. Marlene at the bakery. She has always been a discreet and trustworthy person." Mrs. Marlene from St. Jude's Bakery was a 60-year-old woman who knew everyone in town. When Aunt Martha and Caleb James arrived at the bakery, she greeted them with a warm smile. "Martha, Caleb James, so good to see you. How are things?" "Well, Marlene, actually, we wanted to talk to you about a private matter. Of course, let's go to the back." The conversation in the back of the bakery was direct and effective. Mrs. Marlene had been one of the first victims of Sterling, losing her delivery van because of a loan with impossible interest rates. "I always knew that wasn't right," the woman said, "but what could a simple person like me do against a man with his power?" "Now you can do a lot," Caleb James explained. "Together with the other families, you can put an end to this." "And you're sure there won't be any retaliation?" "Marlene, do you trust me?" asked Aunt Martha. "With my life." "Then trust that this is safe and necessary." Mrs. Marlene agreed to give a statement, and also offered to help convince other families who frequented her bakery. "Many people come here and complain about the problems they've had with Sterling. If I say there's a way to get justice, I believe they'll agree to participate." "Perfect," said Aunt Martha, "but be discreet. We don't know if he has informants in town." "I know how to be discreet. I haven't survived in this business for 20 years without knowing how to keep secrets." The second family on the list lived on the other side of town in a small house near the bus station. They were the Brookses, a young couple who had lost their motorcycle to Sterling right after their wedding. When Aunt Martha and Caleb James Sullivan arrived there, they found only Chloe, the wife, at home with a baby of a few months. "Hi, Mrs. Martha. Hi, Caleb. What brings you here?" "Hi, Chloe. We came to talk about the motorcycle you lost last year." The young woman's expression changed immediately. "Why do you want to talk about that?" she asked, visibly uncomfortable. "Because maybe you can get it back." "Get it back how?" Caleb James explained about the investigation and the possibility of proving that Sterling's contracts were fraudulent. "Do you still have the documents?" "We do. My husband kept them because he said one day he'd try to do something." "And where is your husband now?" "Working on a farm outside of town. He only comes back at the end of the week." "Would he agree to give a statement?" Chloe picked up the baby and thought for a moment. "I don't know. He was very angry when he lost the bike. He might want to participate, but he might also be afraid." "And you, what do you think?" "I think if there's a chance to get justice, we have to try, especially now that we have a child. So can you think it over and give us an answer by tomorrow?" "You can count on it. I'll talk to my husband tonight when he calls." The third family on the list was more complex. The Hayeses had lost not only a car, but also their home, because of a loan that turned into an impossible debt to pay. When they arrived at the small rented house where the family lived now, they were greeted by Mr. Manuel Hayes, a 40-year-old man who worked as a bricklayer. "Mrs. Martha, Caleb James, what a surprise. Please, come in." The house was even smaller than the others they had visited, and it was clear the family faced serious financial difficulties. "Mr. Manuel, we came to talk about the problems you had with Sterling." The man immediately became tense. "Why do you want to know about that?" "Because there might be a way to get justice." "Mrs. Martha, with all due respect, justice for who? Sterling is still out there, rich and powerful, while my family lives in this cramped house." "But what if there was a way to change that?" Mr. Manuel sat in an old chair and looked at them with skepticism. "What way?" Caleb James explained about the journalistic investigation and the evidence they had gathered against Sterling. Do you really think this can work? We do, but we need the help of brave families like yours. Brave or desperate? Both, perhaps, admitted Aunt Martha, but mostly brave. Mr. Manuel called his wife, Mrs. Rose Hayes, who was looking after the children in the backyard. Rose, come here. These people are talking about a way to get justice against Sterling. Mrs. Rose approached with curiosity and skepticism. What kind of justice? Public exposure, investigation of the fraud, possibly even recovery of what you lost. And what do you want from us? For you to tell your story to a journalist, and if possible, to allow the use of the loan documents as evidence. The couple exchanged a long, meaningful look. We need to talk about this between ourselves, said Mr. Manuel. Of course. Can you give us an answer by tomorrow? We can. But can I ask a question? Of course. Why are you doing this? What do you gain by helping families like ours? The question took Caleb James Sullivan by surprise, but Aunt Martha answered without hesitation. Because we believe it's the right thing to do, and because we know what it's like to suffer injustice. Were you also harmed by him? In a different way. But yes, we were harmed. That answer seemed to satisfy Mr. Manuel Hayes, who became more receptive to the idea of joining the investigation. We'll think carefully about it, promised Mrs. Rose Hayes. If there really is a chance to make a difference. There is, Caleb assured, and it will work. When they left the Hayes' house, Aunt Martha was visibly tired. They had spent the whole morning talking with people who carried heavy stories of injustice and suffering. It's hard to hear these stories, isn't it? Commented Caleb. It's very hard, but it also makes me more determined to see that man punished for what he did. Do you think all the families will agree to participate? I think so. They just need courage, and sometimes courage comes when you see you're not alone. In the afternoon, they decided to visit the last two families on the list. The first were the Jenkins, an elderly couple who had lost the car they used to transport vegetables to sell at the market. When they arrived at the simple house on the outskirts of town, they found Mr. Eugene Jenkins sitting on the porch, peeling cassava. Good afternoon, Mr. Eugene, greeted Aunt Martha. Good afternoon, Mrs. Martha. Good afternoon, Caleb. Sit here in the shade. Thank you. How is Mrs. Nancy? She's well. She's inside preparing dinner. Nancy, he shouted into the house. Come here, we have visitors. Mrs. Nancy appeared at the door, wiping her hands on her apron. Martha, what a joy. Come in, my dear. I prefer to stay here on the porch if you don't mind. It's cooler. Of course, of course. Eugene, go get some coffee for our guests. While Mr. Eugene went to prepare the coffee, Aunt Martha took the opportunity to broach the subject with Mrs. Nancy. Nancy, we came to talk to you about the car you lost the year before last. The woman immediately grew sad. That car was our livelihood, Martha. It was how we put food on the table. I know. And perhaps there is a way for you to get justice. When Mr. Eugene returned with the coffee, Aunt Martha explained the whole situation. The couple listened attentively, asking questions and showing growing interest. You mean this man cheated many people besides us? Many people, Mr. Eugene, and now all those people can come together to seek justice. And you think it can work? We do, but we need courageous people like you. Mrs. Nancy looked at her husband. Eugene, what do you think? I think we have nothing left to lose, and if we can help other families who went through what we went through. So you agree to give a statement? We do, said Mrs. Nancy firmly. At our age, we can't be afraid to do the right thing anymore. The last family on the list were the Fosters, who lived in a small house in the town centre. They had lost a small clothing store to Sterling after a loan to expand the business turned into a financial trap. When Aunt Martha and Caleb arrived there, they found only Josie Foster, the couple's eldest daughter, about 20 years old. Hi, Mrs. Martha. Hi, Caleb. My parents aren't here. They went out to look for work. What a shame. We came to talk to them about an important matter. Can I help with something? Actually, yes, you can. It's about the store your family lost. Josie made a bitter expression. That sad story, what do you want to know about it? Whether your family would like to join an investigation to prove you were cheated. An investigation how? Caleb James Sullivan explained the plan for the journalistic exposé and the evidence they had gathered. "Do you really think this can work?" "We do. And your family would be very important for the investigation because you have a well-documented case." "That's true. My parents kept all the papers. They always said they would try to do something one day." "And what do you think? Would they agree to participate?" "I think so. They were very upset about what happened, mainly because the store was their life's dream. Can you talk to them and give an answer by tomorrow?" "I can. Actually, I think I can answer now. They will want to participate, I'm sure." "Are you really sure?" "Absolutely. My parents always said if they had a chance to get justice against that man, they wouldn't think twice." When they left the Foster's house, Mrs. Martha and Caleb James Sullivan had secured the commitment of every family on the list. It was a better result than they had hoped for. "Caleb James, I think we did it," said Mrs. Martha, satisfaction in her voice. "We really did. All the families will participate. Now we just have to wait for the journalist to arrive and hope everything works out. It will work out, Aunt, I'm sure." When they arrived home in the late afternoon, Uncle Arthur was in the kitchen preparing a snack. "Where have you two been all day?" "Visiting some people in town. It had been a while since I went out to see my friends," replied Mrs. Martha. "That's good. You've been very shut in at home lately." That night, after Uncle Arthur went to sleep, Mrs. Martha and Caleb James Sullivan talked about the preparations for the next day. "Tomorrow, I'll confirm with all the families and pass the final list to Silas," said Mrs. Martha, "and I'll help organize the documents we gathered. Caleb James, are you prepared to see your father tomorrow?" The question took the boy by surprise. In the rush of preparations, he had almost forgotten that the reunion would be the next day. "I think I'm nervous." "It's normal to be nervous. 3 years is a long time." "Do you think he'll be different?" "Probably yes. People change with time and experiences. But his love for you never changed." "How can you be so sure?" "Because Mr. Silas told me how he talks about you. A man who speaks of his son with shining eyes after 3 years of separation is a man who never lost that love." That assurance calmed Caleb James Sullivan, who fell asleep thinking of the reunion that would happen in just a few hours. On Saturday morning, they woke up earlier than usual. Mrs. Martha packed a small suitcase with clothes for a few days, maintaining the facade that they were visiting her sister in Memphis. Uncle Arthur accompanied them to the bus station, where they supposedly would catch the bus to Memphis. "Take care over there, and if you need anything, call me," said the man, hugging his nephew and sister-in-law. "We'll be fine, Arthur. It's just a quick visit," replied Mrs. Martha. After Uncle Arthur walked away, they waited a few minutes and then returned home by a different route. The journalist from New Orleans would arrive at noon, and they needed to be at the ferry to receive him. At 11:30, Mrs. Martha and Caleb James Sullivan were on the ferry, helping Silas organize the documents and prepare the space for the interviews. Nervousness was visible in all of them. "Did the families confirm they are coming?" asked Silas. "All confirmed," replied Mrs. Martha. "They are excited about the possibility of getting justice." "And the journalist?" "Should be here any minute. He said he was coming straight from the airport." It was then they heard the sound of a speedboat motor approaching. It was a different vessel from the ones that normally traveled the river, more modern and faster. "That must be him," said Silas, heading toward the edge of the ferry. The boat pulled up alongside the ferry, and from it stepped a middle-aged man with graying hair and a professional camera hanging around his neck. "Good morning. I'm Grant Harrison from River Network News," the man introduced himself. "Silas Hayes. Pleasure to meet you. This is Martha and Caleb James Sullivan from Samuel's family. Pleased to meet you. Samuel has told me so much about you." "You've spoken to him?" asked Mrs. Martha eagerly. "We have. He's on his way. He should be here within the next 2 hours." The news that Samuel was indeed on his way deeply moved Mrs. Martha and Caleb James. After 3 years, the reunion was finally about to happen. "While we wait for him, how about we start with the interviews?" suggested Grant. "Perfect. The families should be arriving any minute." As if on cue, several canoes began to approach the ferry. They were the families who had agreed to give their testimonies, all arriving punctually for what would be the most important moment of their lives in recent years. The first to arrive was Mrs. Gladys, rowing alone in a small canoe. She was dressed in her best clothes and carried a bag with all the documents related to her late husband's car. "Good morning, Caleb James. Good morning, Mrs. Martha," the lady greeted. "Good morning, Mrs. Gladys. This is Grant, the journalist who will interview you." "A pleasure, Mrs. Gladys," said Grant, extending his hand. "Are you ready to tell your story?" "I am. I've been waiting 3 years for this opportunity." Next to arrive were the Millers, Mrs. Mary and Mr. Joe, also bringing all their documents carefully organized. They greeted everyone and showed they were determined to take part in the report. "Mrs. Mary, how do you feel knowing your story might help other families?" asked Grant, already starting to record some footage. "I feel proud to be able to turn our pain into something that can make a difference." The Jenkins arrived next, Mr. Eugene rowing slowly while Mrs. Nancy held an old folder with their documents. "Mr. Eugene, how long have you been waiting for an opportunity like this?" "Since the day we lost our car, son. Since the day our lives changed for the worse because of that man's greed." Grant was impressed by the determination and dignity of each family. It was clear this report would be impactful. The Brooks family arrived last, Chloe and her husband Ronald, who had managed to get the day off from work at the farm to take part in the interview. "Ronald, your wife told me you lost the motorcycle right after you got married. How did that affect you?" "That bike was our means of transport, our means of work. Losing it was like losing our independence." When all the families were gathered on the ferry, Grant began recording an introduction for the report. "I'm here on the Mississippi River in Natchez, where we've uncovered a loan sharking scheme that has harmed dozens of hard-working families. What you're about to see in the following footage is an example of how greed can destroy lives, but also of how courage can bring justice." The interviews began individually, with each family telling their story in detail to the camera. Grant was an experienced journalist and knew how to guide the conversations to draw out not just the facts, but also the emotion behind each case. Mrs. Gladys was the first to be interviewed. Sitting in the ferry's cabin, with a photograph of her husband in her hands, she told how they had lost the car that represented the only valuable memory she had of her life companion. "My George worked his whole life to buy that car. It was a Blue Beetle, well kept. When he passed, the car was all I had left of him," said the lady with tears in her eyes. "And how did you lose your vehicle?" "I needed money to pay for the medicines my George was using before he passed. I looked for Sterling because I was told he lent money quickly. He made me sign some papers I didn't fully understand." "And what happened after?" "The interest was so high I could never pay it back. In no time, the debt became larger than the car's value. Then he took my Beetle." Carlos was recording everything, capturing not just the words but also the genuine emotion in the woman's voice. "Mrs. Gladys, did you keep the documents from this loan?" "I kept everything. Even though it pains me to look at those papers, I kept it all." "And can you show us?" Mrs. Gladys opened her purse and took out the documents. Carlos examined them in front of the camera, pointing out the most obvious irregularities. "Look here, folks. This clause sets an interest rate of 15% per month. That is far above what's permitted by law, and here there's a penalty of 50% on the total amount for a delay of just 7 days. The interview with Mrs. Gladys lasted about 40 minutes, establishing a strong emotional tone for the entire report. The second interview was with the Miller family. Mrs. Mary and Mr. Joe sat side by side, holding each other's hands as they told their story. "Our car was an inheritance from Mary's father," explained Mr. Joe. "It was a simple car, but it was paid off. It was ours." "And why did you seek out Sterling?" "Our daughter got sick and needed urgent surgery," answered Mrs. Mary. "The health plan didn't cover it, and we didn't have enough money." "How much did you need?" $3,000. Sterling said he would lend it for 6 months with low interest." "And what really happened?" "The interest wasn't low, and when we couldn't pay on time, he said the car was worth $10,000 and that our debt was already at $12,000, explained Mr. Joe, anger in his voice. Carlos showed the family's documents to the camera, highlighting the abusive clauses and the fraudulent interest calculations. "Here we have another clear case of loan sharking. Look, the amount lent was $3,000, but with the penalties and compound interest, in 6 months the debt had reached $12,000. "And how did you feel when you lost the car?" "As if they had stolen our dignity," answered Mrs. Mary. It wasn't just a car, it was our history, our independence. The third interview was with the young couple Chloe and Ronald Brooks, who represented a younger generation affected by Sterling's scheme. Had you just gotten married when you lost the motorcycle? Yes, answered Chloe, adjusting the baby in her lap. The bike was our means of transport and also our source of income. Ronald made deliveries with it. And why did you seek out Sterling? We wanted to buy furniture for our new home, explained Ronald. Sterling said it was easy, that he'd lend the money in 5 minutes. And was it really that easy? To get the money it was. To pay it back, that was impossible. Carlos continued documenting the details of each case, creating a comprehensive panorama of the loan sharking scheme that had affected so many families. While he was interviewing the Jenkins, the elderly couple who had lost the car they used to sell vegetables at the market, Caleb James Sullivan heard the sound of a speedboat approaching again. His heart raced. Could it be his father finally arriving? Silas headed to the edge of the ferry to greet the newcomer, and Caleb followed him with growing anxiety. From the speedboat stepped a man of about 40, with slightly graying brown hair and a smile that Caleb recognized immediately, even after 3 years. It was Samuel. His father had returned. "Dad!" shouted Caleb, running toward the man. "Caleb, my son!" The reunion between father and son, after 3 years of separation, was too emotional to be described in words. They embraced in the middle of the ferry, surrounded by the families giving their testimonies and the journalists documenting everything. "How you've grown, my son," said Samuel, with tears in his eyes. "You were so small when I left." "Daddy, I knew you'd come back, I always knew." "And you figured it all out on your own. Mr. Silas told me you were the one who started investigating the ferry. I wanted to understand why you left, and I discovered you didn't leave, you went to protect us." Samuel looked at his son with pride and emotion. "You've become a courageous man, Caleb James, more courageous than I am." "You are courageous too, Dad. You helped many families. And now we're going to help many more." Aunt Martha approached timidly, still processing the fact that her brother-in-law had really returned. "Samuel," she said simply. "Martha, thank you for taking care of my son all these years. He's my nephew. It was my duty." "It wasn't duty. It was love. And I will never forget that." The three of them embraced, finally reunited after so many years of separation and suffering. Grant, who was documenting the reunion with his camera, realized he was witnessing something very special. "Samuel, can I interview you about the work you developed to help these families?" "Of course. That's why I came back." Samuel's interview was the most detailed and technical of them all. He explained how he discovered Sterling's scheme, how he documented the frauds, and how he developed strategies to return the illegally seized property to the families. "Samuel, did you spend 3 years away from your family to gather this evidence?" "I did. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. But it was necessary. Sterling had threatened my family, and I needed to make sure he was neutralized before I returned." "And how did you manage to recover the cars and other property?" "With a lot of planning and care. First, I documented each case, proving there was fraud in the contract. Then I tried to negotiate with Sterling, offering to settle the debt for the fair value without the predatory interest. And when he refused to negotiate, then I used alternative methods, always within the law, always documenting everything." "Alternative methods like what?" "Sterling kept the confiscated property in a private warehouse. I managed to prove that this warehouse operated without the necessary licenses, and that much of the property stored there had been confiscated illegally. So I recovered that property to return it to the rightful owners." Grant was impressed with the level of organization and planning Samuel had employed in his mission. "And you never thought about going to the local authorities?" "I did, but I discovered that some of the local authorities had a close relationship with Sterling. My complaint would have been buried, and I would have been even more exposed." "Is that why you went to the press?" "Exactly. Public exposure was the only way to ensure the state authorities would take notice and be forced to act." As Grant finished his interview with Samuel, the families present talked among themselves, sharing their experiences and creating a feeling of community and collective strength. "Mrs. Gladys, are you prepared for what might happen when this report airs?" asked Mrs. Mary. "I am prepared, my dear. At my age, we no longer have time to be afraid of doing the right thing. And you, Chloe and Ronald?" "We're nervous," admitted Ronald. "But it's a good kind of nervous. We're finally going to see justice done." Grant concluded all the interviews by late afternoon. He had collected over 5 hours of testimonies, enough documents to prove dozens of cases of fraud, and footage that told a powerful human story. "Everyone, I want to thank you all for your courage," said the journalist. "This report will air in the National Sunday paper edition. Over 10 million people will learn your stories." "And what happens after?" asked Mr. Eugene Jenkins. "Afterwards, the state authorities will be forced to investigate, and you will have all the necessary legal support to recover what you lost." "All the legal support?" asked Mrs. Gladys. "River Network News has a partnership with a human rights organization. They will provide free lawyers for all of you." The news that they would have professional legal support left all the families emotional and hopeful. As Grant was preparing to leave, Samuel made one final appeal to the camera. "I want to take this opportunity to apologize to the families of Natchez for leaving without explanation. I didn't want to abandon them. I wanted to protect them and find a definitive solution to the problem that was plaguing us. And now do you believe you found that solution?" "I do. With the exposure this report will generate, Sterling will no longer be able to operate in the shadows, and the families will have the necessary legal tools to recover what is rightfully theirs." After Grant left, the families began saying their goodbyes and returning to their homes. Each carried a renewed hope that they would finally see justice done. Samuel, Aunt Martha, and Caleb James were alone on the ferry for the first time in 3 years. "And now, Samuel?" asked Aunt Martha. "Now we wait for the report to air tomorrow and hope everything works out." "And after?" "After I go home to stay." Caleb James smiled upon hearing those words. Finally, his family would be together again. "Dad, can you tell me about these 3 years? About where you were?" "I can, son. I have a lot to tell you." Samuel began recounting his journey over the last 3 years, how he had hidden in small towns in the region, always moving when he felt he was being sought, how he had worked simple jobs to support himself while continuing his investigation into Sterling. "The hardest part wasn't the simple life I was leading," explained Samuel. "It was missing you. Every day I woke up thinking about when I could come home." "Why did you never try to get in touch?" "Because any contact could have put you in danger. Sterling had people watching our house, watching the two of you. If he knew I was trying to communicate, he could have used you to force me to stop the investigation." "And how did you know you were being watched?" "Silas kept me informed about everything happening in town. He told me about strange men asking questions about our family, about attempts at intimidation." Aunt Martha listened to everything in silence, finally fully understanding the sacrifice her brother-in-law had made for love of family. "Samuel, you must be tired from these 3 years away from home." "I'm exhausted, Martha, but I'm also happy. We finally managed to do what needed to be done." "And are you sure it's safe to return now?" "I am. Starting tomorrow, when the report airs, Sterling will be fighting for his own survival. He won't have the time or resources to take revenge on anyone. What if he tries to flee the region? We've already arranged for the state authorities to be notified of that possibility. He's been under surveillance since yesterday." The conversation lasted all night, with Samuel telling details of his life in recent years, and Caleb James recounting how he had discovered the truth about the ferry. "Dad, I always knew you'd come back," said Caleb James Sullivan, nestled beside his father. "How did you know, son?" "Because you always told me family is the most important thing in the world, and whoever truly believes that always finds a way to come home." Samuel Sullivan hugged his son, moved by the boy's maturity and wisdom. "You've grown so much, Caleb, and not just in height. Aunt Martha taught me many important things. She is a special woman, and you are a special boy. And now can we live like a normal family? We can. Starting Monday, we'll begin our normal life again." On Sunday morning, the three got up early to watch the report that would air on the national evening news. They had brought a small television onto the barge, and waited anxiously for the broadcast. At 8 in the morning the report began. Grant Harrison appeared on screen, in front of the barge, introducing the story. "Good morning. I'm here in the heart of the South to show you a story of courage, injustice, and finally hope. What you're about to see in the following footage could be happening in your town too." The report lasted 15 minutes and was devastating for Sterling. Each family told their story with emotion and dignity. The fraudulent documents were clearly exposed, and Samuel explained in detail how the scheme worked. "This is a reality in many small towns across the country," concluded Grant. "Vulnerable people being exploited by unscrupulous loan sharks. But this story also shows us that unity and courage can overcome injustice." When the report ended, Samuel, Aunt Martha, and Caleb sat in silence for a few minutes, processing what they had just seen. "It's something else seeing our story told like that," said Aunt Martha. "And seeing how other people went through similar troubles," added Caleb. "The most important thing is that now the story isn't just ours anymore," said Samuel. "It belongs to the whole country, and that changes everything." For the rest of Sunday, they received dozens of calls from people who had watched the report. Journalists from other outlets wanting more details, lawyers offering help, and most of all, people from other towns sharing that they had been through similar situations. "Samuel, your strategy worked," said Silas, who had arrived at the barge in the late afternoon. "Sterling won't be able to recover from this exposure. And what do we know about him since yesterday? He tried to leave town overnight, but was intercepted by the federal police on the highway. He's in custody for questioning. So it's over. It's over. His bank accounts have been frozen, the vehicle impound lot has been sealed, and a federal investigation has been opened." The news that Sterling had been detained spread quickly through the town. During Sunday night, Samuel, Aunt Martha, and Caleb received visits from several of the families who had participated in the report. They were all elated by the news and grateful for the work that had been done. "Samuel, how can we ever thank you for what you did for us?" asked Mrs. Gladys. "You don't need to thank me. You did the hardest part, which was having the courage to speak publicly." "And now, what happens to our cars?" asked Mr. Joe. "The authorities will inventory everything in Sterling's impound lot. The vehicles that were illegally seized will be returned to their original owners." "And will that take long?" "A few weeks at most. Now that the case has national attention, the authorities will act quickly." "And the money we lost?" "That will be recovered too. Sterling's assets will be used to compensate all the victims." The families left the barge that night with a feeling of victory and justice they hadn't felt in years. On Monday morning, Samuel, Aunt Martha, and Caleb James Sullivan returned home for the first time as a reunited family. Uncle Arthur was surprised to see Samuel, but welcomed his brother-in-law with joy and understanding. "Samuel, it's good to have you back," the man said, hugging his brother-in-law. "Thank you, Arthur, and thank you for taking care of my family while I was away." "They're my family too." During the following days, life in Natchez was completely transformed. The report had drawn the attention of state and federal authorities, who launched investigations not only into Sterling, but into similar schemes across the entire region. Lawyers arrived in town to help the victimized families, and a restitution fund was created to repay all the financial losses caused by the loan sharking scheme. A week after the report, Mrs. Gladys was the first to recover her property. The Blue Beetle that had belonged to her husband was returned exactly as it was when it was confiscated, including some personal items that were in the glove compartment. "Caleb," the lady said when he went to visit her, "I don't know how to thank you for what you did for me." "You don't need to thank me, Mrs. Gladys. It was an honor to be able to help." "You gave me back more than a car, my boy. You gave me back a piece of my George." One by one, all the families recovered their lost belongings. The Millers got back the car that had belonged to Mrs. Mary's father. The Brooks recovered the motorcycle they used for work. The Jenkins once again had their vehicle to sell vegetables at the market. Each return was a small celebration in town, and Samuel became a local hero for developing the plan that made it all possible. 2 months after the report, Sterling was sentenced to 12 years in prison for loan sharking, forming a criminal organization, and fraud against vulnerable people. All his assets were auctioned to repay the victims, and his organization was completely dismantled. But the most important transformation wasn't the punishment of Sterling or the recovery of the lost property. It was the way the Natchez community came together throughout the process. The families who had been victims created an association to help other people who might be going through similar situations. Mrs. Beatrice became the association's president, using her network of contacts to identify possible cases of financial exploitation. Samuel decided to use his experience to work officially with the federal police, helping to identify and dismantle loan sharking schemes in other regions of the country. "Dad, are you going to travel again?" asked Caleb, afraid his father would have to leave again. "I will travel, yes, my son, but now it's official work, and you can come with me whenever you want." "And the ferry?" "The ferry is going to become a floating community center, a place where people can come to seek help, guidance, or simply to talk." The ferry, which had been a subject of jokes and scorn, became the symbol of the community's resilience and solidarity. Silas continued to take care of the place, but now as an official employee of the association, created by the victimized families. 6 months after it all began, Caleb was on the ferry again, but this time accompanied by other children from town who came to participate in the educational activities held there. "Caleb, do you regret getting involved in all this?" asked one of the children, fascinated by the story they had heard from the adults. "Never," the boy replied, looking at the river flowing calmly beside the ferry. "It was the most important adventure of my life." "Why?" "Because I learned that sometimes people need to be brave to do the right thing, and that when good people come together, they can overcome any injustice." "And you weren't afraid?" "I was very afraid. But my father always taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is doing the right thing even when you are scared." From a distance, Samuel watched his son talking with the other children and felt a deep satisfaction. Caleb James had transformed into a wise and courageous young man who would carry the lessons learned during those difficult months forever. Aunt Martha approached Samuel on the riverbank. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking it was worth it. All the suffering, all the separation. It was worth it to reach this moment. And I'm thinking that our family became stronger after all of this." It did. And Caleb James learned lessons that will guide him for the rest of his life. In the late afternoon, when all the activities had ended and the children had returned to their homes, Caleb James, Samuel, and Aunt Martha were alone on the raft, watching the sunset over the Mississippi River. "Dad, can I ask a question?" "Of course, my son. If you could go back in time, would you do everything the same?" Samuel thought for a moment before answering. "I would do everything the same, Caleb James, because the end result was worth every day of suffering." "And you don't regret having taken so many risks?" "What I would regret is having stood by and watched good people being harmed by someone cruel. That is something I would regret for the rest of my life." Caleb James smiled, completely understanding his father's answer. "So we did the right thing?" "We did the right thing, my son, and we will always do the right thing, even when it's hard." As the sun set slowly over the river, tinting the water gold and orange, the three remained silent, each lost in their own thoughts about the journey they had traveled together. The raft that Caleb James had inherited as an apparently worthless inheritance had transformed into the foundation of a new life for the entire community. More than that, it had become a symbol that love, courage, and determination can overcome any adversity. And Caleb James, who had begun that adventure as an orphan boy curious about a mysterious inheritance, had transformed into a young man who understood that the greatest inheritances aren't made of iron and wood, but of values, principles, and memories that can last forever. When the stars began to appear in the dark sky, Samuel, Aunt Martha, and Caleb James returned home, knowing that the next day they would wake up as a complete family, in a fairer community, with a future full of possibilities. The raft remained floating calmly on the river, illuminated only by the full moon, guarding the secrets of a story of courage that would be told for many generations in the town of Natchez. A story that proved that even in the most unlikely places, even in the most difficult situations, good can always triumph over evil when courageous people unite for a just cause. And among so many lessons learned, Caleb James understood the most important one of all, that the true value of an inheritance isn't in what it is, but in what it can become when it is cared for with love and transformed with purpose. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave it in the comments with sincere words. Do you believe Caleb James made the right decision by getting involved in the investigation? We would love to read your opinion. Thank you so much for your company. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other exciting stories.